This is East Idaho Newsmakers with Nate Eaton.
Welcome to East Idaho Newsmakers. Every week we introduce you to interesting and unique people living in or visiting East Idaho. Today we are happy to have Frank Montoya here with us. Frank recently retired from the FBI and has a very distinguished career. I've tried to summarize it all onto one page. I'll tell you a little bit about him. Frank worked in multiple positions and locations with the FBI and was head of national counterintelligence for the United States government. He began his career as a special agent in San Antonio, where he worked violent crime and led the division's fugitive task force. He also worked in Oklahoma City to assist in the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building bombing investigation. Frank has served as a surveillance team leader on drug, violent crime, and national security cases. He has led domestic and foreign investigations and operations. He established the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force and served as the special agent in charge of the Honolulu and Seattle divisions. Frank went to BYU in Provo. He also served in the U.S. Army, and now he is living in nearby Logan, Utah, stress-free and retired. Thanks for coming up to Idaho Falls today. Let's start with some of the news of the day, news of the month. We know that FBI Director James Comey has testified about the wiretapping, or the alleged wiretapping, that President Trump claimed was happening at Trump Tower. What do you know about that situation?
Pretty much what is out there publicly. I mean, I do talk to some friends that are still working, but it is one of those situations where a lot of it is close hold because it is an ongoing investigation. But the director was very clear in his comments where he said that there is no evidence that there was a wiretap either on Mr. Trump's telephone or on Trump Tower itself, relative to the Russian investigation that he also clarified is underway. What that means is that there is no tap. I think it's really important to point out here is that a president of the United States cannot order a wiretap, especially under what is known as the FISA, or the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And that is a direct result of excesses that occurred in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that were subsequently investigated by congressional committees, one known as the Church Committee, the other one known as the Pike, where it led to legislation, to law. If it had occurred, there would be a paper trail. There was not one because it did not occur.
The other issue that the FBI is investigating, you mentioned, is the possible connection to Russia.
Correct.
Involving the election and any other interference. What do we know about that?
Yeah, I think that what we should be concerned about most of all is that a foreign nation state at least attempted to undermine our democracy, attempted to undermine our sovereignty. How successful they were at that, it continues to be under investigation. It is one of those kinds of investigations that is perhaps the most difficult that we do in the FBI. It's a counterintelligence investigation. There will be attempts to identify criminal wrongdoing, but a lot of it is also about old-fashioned intelligence gathering. And when you think about what the FBI does across the spectrum of responsibilities that it has, you know, dismantling drug cartels or investigating complex white-collar crime violations, or investigating bank robberies and fugitives. Think of the most complex kinds of cases that we do, that's counterintelligence in secret. So you have the added challenge of operating in a secret environment. And the reason why it's that way is because you have to protect your sources and methods. You have to protect the way you obtain that information, whether it's from a human or through electronic surveillance. And oftentimes in a counterintelligence investigation, you're also working with other elements of the intelligence community, so CIA, NSA, the military intelligence services, if appropriate. And, you know, there are 16 different agencies, 17 actually, different agencies that conduct counterintelligence in the United States government as a primary function. And a lot of times these investigations are coordinated with most, if not all of them. And you have to protect the way you do that business. And so the challenge is that it's not just a normal investigation. It is conducted under these kinds of constraints where classification comes into play, whether it's secret or top secret information, where techniques are to come into play, whether it's recruiting humans to provide information or it is the use of FISA, or if it's the NSA, the use of signals intelligence.
Back in October, James Comey announced that he was investigating Hillary Clinton's emails. And a lot of people said, oh, he should resign. Now he's come out and said that there's no wiretapping that President Trump has claimed. And other people are saying he should resign. What are your thoughts on Director Comey? From everything we've read, it seems that he's a straight shooter and isn't partisan either way.
I think that we are very fortunate that there is a man like Jim Comey. And yeah, I'm partisan when it comes to how I feel about him. He was my boss. I worked closely with him. But I got to see up close as well the nature, the level, the intensity really of his integrity. He has made it very clear to the organization that we are apolitical, that we are neutral, and that we will pursue or we will uphold the rule of law. And it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. He's not tone deaf to politics, but he does understand the role that he plays, that the FBI plays in being that objective investigative law enforcement and intelligence agency in the United States government that exists solely for moments like this. I mean, there may never come anything of the allegations, but they still need to be investigated because there's enough there, enough smoke, if you will, to take a look at what is happening. And so when you ask me that kind of question, I say he's a man of the utmost integrity, that he is apolitical, and that he is intent on one thing and one thing only, regardless of the political pressures that are out there or the commentary that is out there, and that is to uphold the laws of this land. And he will do that, along with the organization that he leads. I got no question about that.
One of the duties of the FBI is to assist local law enforcement who might need assistance, who might need help. Last July, or actually July of 2015, a little 2-year-old boy named Eeyore Coons went camping with his family up in Timber Creek Campground in Lemhi County and vanished. He hasn't been seen since. There hasn't been any sign of him. Nobody has been charged, but the FBI office in Utah was brought in to help assist with that case. Now, Frank was working in Seattle at the time. He has nothing to do with this case, but I'm interested to get your opinion. How would the FBI have assisted in this case, and where do they go from here if the case is cold, if there seems to be no new developments?
Well, we work these cases all over the country. It was my unfortunate opportunity when I was in Seattle as the head of that office shortly after my arrival to participate in a child abduction that ended up in a tragic death. The child was killed. The role that we play, I mean, we have a role in terms of the federal kidnapping statutes, but really what ends up happening is we play a role as a partner to our local and state, the local and state law enforcement agencies. It's important that we build relationships with them so that in events like this, we can work more seamlessly with them. And I know that the special agent in charge in Salt Lake City, he has offices throughout Idaho, and I know that they work hard at developing those relationships. Our role really is a support function in that regard. Resources we can bring to bear in people, laboratory assistance, specialty assistance. We have individuals that are super qualified when it comes to behavioral sciences and deal with these kinds of activities on a regular and ongoing basis, and they can come in and provide, I think, that is well regarded insight, especially by the local and state authorities. In a case like this, the challenge is evidence. The challenge is what the investigation itself, does the trail go cold? Do people talk? Are people not talking? That is really the essence of what we do, is talk to people. And it's not like a television show, a CSI or 24, where something gets resolved in an hour. It just doesn't happen that way. It's not like we can pick up a rock from the ground and do a laser imagery of it and figure out what the blood type is of the perpetrator. It typically doesn't happen that way. What is most important is that people talk to us.
You mentioned CSI, and when a lot of people think of the FBI, it's guys with big guns rushing into situations, tackling bad guys, risking their lives. Has there been situations in your career that have actually been like that, where your life has been on the line?
Certainly. We do carry guns for a living. We're not on the front lines, so to speak, as say the patrolman is out on the street every single day, who is dealing with the public on a day in and day out basis. But in San Antonio, Texas, for instance, I was part of our fugitive task force down there. And so we were in less than savory neighborhoods all of the time, tracking down all manner of violent criminals. That was our emphasis, was the violent criminal. And so, yeah, there were days when it was a bit of a challenge. I try not to tell my wife too much about that stuff because I don't want her to worry. But yeah, it was.
Is there a situation you can share with us that won't jeopardize any case, but might give us an insight into how dangerous this job may sometimes be?
Well, yeah, certainly, it happens that you get shot at. I was stationed in Puerto Rico, and in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we were on a surveillance in an armored car robbery. And my partner and I, we were, the team that is actually watching the target, or the subjects as we would call them, that's called the eye. And we had just left the eye and were rotated off to another location where we could kind of rest and refit while somebody else took that responsibility. We still needed to be ready to respond in a moment's notice. We're all on car radios. And we had stopped in this parking lot. It was a grocery store parking lot where it was a Saturday night, so there was somewhat of social activity going on. People barbecuing, in the parking lot. It was just kind of a festive atmosphere. And this individual walked by, and completely unrelated to what we were doing, but he didn't like the fact that we were there. And so he pulled a pistol out of his waistband and fired a round or two. I can remember one shot, but maybe two, right at us. They missed. And we rolled out, and we were prepared to return fire. The problem was that there were a lot of people in the crowd. And so the challenge of not hitting somebody else helped convince us to hold fire. He disappeared into the darkness. We went to look for him, but it was one of those situations where it could happen anywhere, anytime. Another situation where you try to communicate with the locals or with the other law enforcement that may be on an instance or an incident where you're responding, and our communication wasn't that good, and we ended up being in the middle of a situation where it was local law enforcement were taking on these gangbangers, so to speak, in another location, and we were kind of caught in the middle. So in those instances, all you can do is duck and wait for everything to end, and then call out, and hopefully, they'll recognize you as law enforcement. I mean, we try. One of the things about being in the FBI is we're mostly in plain clothes. Every once in a while, we'll put on the vest with the big FBI or the beret jacket that everybody sees on TV, but a lot of times you're undercover. And again, this is where the importance of having relationships with your local partners is so important, so that you recognize operating procedures in those events or instances where you're not specifically working together on a case.
I imagine that your job and a lot of jobs in the FBI changed on September 11th, 2001. You were in the Pentagon when the plane hit.
I was in a meeting there, yes.
How did your role change?
It gained a greater emphasis. National security investigations and operations gained a greater emphasis post 9/11. But yes, it was one of those things where the FBI had a national security mission. It's had one forever. I mean, and it was legislated, in fact, in 1947 by the National Security Act. In terms of intelligence gathering in the United States, that was a primary responsibility of the FBI. But it didn't have that much of a profile. And some people would say that probably was a good thing, because when you're talking about intelligence in the United States, we are a free country. And protecting American civil liberties is first and foremost at the front of our daily effort. I mean, it gets beat into your head from the day you walk into Quantico, and I mean beat, not literally, but yeah. Well, maybe sometimes during our hand-to-hand training. But the reality is that we take that very seriously, and so everything that we do is protected. We, in the sense that we gain the rightful authorities to pursue those kinds of investigations, but at the same time, we do everything we can to protect sources and methods because they can be so sensitive. You know, if somebody's accused of being a spy and it turns out that they're not, the last thing we want is to have that played out on the front page of a newspaper or on the evening news.
EastIdahoNews.com.
However,
Yeah.
because what if they are not guilty? What if they are the wrong person? Well, we want to protect against smearing their reputation as much as anything else. But 9/11 really, it was an important period in our history, not just because of what happened, but because how it really radically changed the way the intelligence community does its work. You know, there are lots of stories about how information sharing was spotty at best, you know, pre 9/11. You know, when you compare those days with these days, it's night and day difference. When you think about, for instance, counterterrorism investigations since 9/11, the successes that we have had. Yes, there have been some failures as well. I mean, when you look at what happened in London, you know, on Westminster Bridge, for instance, and the tragedy there, how do you defend against the guy who decides to rent a car and drive it on a bridge and run people over and then jump out of the car with a knife? Those are and he doesn't communicate that intent with anyone. Those are very difficult things to address. But as an organization, speaking for the FBI, the transformation really from 9/11 to the present has been dramatic. And yes, there's room for continued improvement. The new director, you know, Mr. Comey, he's the right person for the right time to take us from where we were to where we need to continue going. His mandate is firm but fair. You know, he wants us to when we talk about leadership, when we talk about continuing the transformation process, when we talk about how we do our work every single day, that we're firm but fair in that process. And it's made a big difference. We are not the organization that we were 17 years ago.
Is the world more dangerous today than when you started in the FBI?
Absolutely. And for many, many reasons, not just terrorism, but for many reasons.
What is the biggest concern people here in East Idaho need to have? Is it terrorism?
You know, I mean, the thing about terrorism is that the way it affects our psyche, because it's out there and it's graphic and it's subversive. You know, again, you take that London action or some of the ones that we have seen here since 9/11, which was obviously a major deviation from typical types of terrorism where, you know, it's one individual with an AK or more likely with a butcher knife who goes in and kills 2 or 3 or 4 people. It's heinous, it's despicable, it's not acceptable, but at the same time, 40,000 people die a year in this country from opioid overdoses, from car accidents. And so what I try to tell people is how about we keep this in perspective? It exists. There is a major effort to prevent it from growing or getting worse. But the fact of the matter is there are other issues in our communities that we need to be more concerned about. You know, whether it's domestic terrorism. I came from Washington, in eastern Washington. It was a constant conversation amongst the FBI and state and local officials. And that was, you know, how do we do a better job of preventing acts of domestic terrorism or from it incubating in places like Spokane and in those areas. It's a concern that they had that we tried to help them with. At the same time, beyond that, the opioid epidemic that's sweeping our nation right now. Yes, it's a problem in terms of where it's coming from. It's pure, it's cheap, it's readily available. There is the connection to the prescribed drugs and the challenge that it is causing, not just for our communities, but for families. You know, how do you deal with that? Mental health issues, the trust in many communities, the trust divide in many communities between the community and the police departments that are charged with enforcing the laws. It exists. You know, it's worse in some places than it is in other places, but it still exists. How do we work together to try to fix the problems that ail our community? You know, one of the things that we talked a lot about in the Northwest was the fact, that concern that police officers aren't social workers. And yet, response from other police officers that, wait a second, the vast majority of my calls are domestic disturbance. And when they involve mental health issues or they involve drug issues, how are we going to be able to deal with that? And then the other righteous concern that, are enough resources spent on training and on other services beyond law enforcement? Because we're not going to cop our way out of this, no pun intended. We're not going to be able to arrest our way out of this. These problems that affect our communities, if we don't find other better ways to address them that are whole of community approaches, and that includes government, then we're going to continue to be plagued by them.
You said that over the course of your career, you've lived in 15 different places?
At least, yeah.
15 different places doing a variety of projects on a variety of different crime-related issues. What have you learned about America?
It's the greatest country in the world. I am proud to be an American. This is, I've been all over the world as well, and I can tell you that I could not have achieved in my life, which was beyond my wildest dreams, by the way, but I could not have achieved in my life what I have achieved anywhere else. And there's a lot of other great countries out there with sound democratic traditions, but only here would that be possible. And I've had conversations with my friends in these countries, and they back that up. I mean, it's just the opportunity exists here. It's why everybody wants to come here, because there is that dream does live, and there is that opportunity to make a better life for yourself if you are willing to work hard. My father often told me that I would have to work twice as hard to be just as good. I took that to heart, and it paid off. And I have, no complaints about that. This being here, being a part of the community, that I'm a part of, the communities that I've been a part of, has reinforced that to me every single day. Yes, we have our problems, but at the same time, we have opportunities to solve those problems. And that has been what always has driven me, and why I've been so privileged and proud to be a part of the FBI, but also a part of law enforcement in the United States intelligence community as well.
You retired less than a year ago. Do you miss it?
There are days when I do. It's been especially challenging these past few months, especially when you read certain Twitter feed and they attack the organization. It just makes it harder for us to do the job, and I wish I was standing with my former buddies, my buddies, taking it in the chest and then doing something about it. Because again, this is what part of the great thing about the FBI, the USIC as well, and that is, regardless of the criticism, every day we're going to strap it on and go do our jobs, and it's going to be in defense of the Constitution and for the benefit of the American people. That's the bottom line.
Thank you very much for being here, Frank Montoya, a retired FBI agent who has, as I mentioned, lived all over the country, done a variety of things, has had a very distinguished career, and is now retired and skiing and enjoying
and
life.
Fishing.
And fishing. You can catch previous episodes of East Idaho Newsmakers down below, and we'll be back next week. I'm Nate Eaton. Have a good week.